it treats time values as independent from the meter. So if I put in a quarter note value, then I can change the meter around that and it will re-notate that appropriately no matter what the context is, which is so handy.
I have been so impressed over the years getting to know today's guest. He's a friend, he's a colleague, he's an entrepreneur, he's a composer, he does so many incredible things. I'm Jason Heath. This is Contrabass Conversations, and we're talking today with Garrett Hope. And I remember so clearly in 2016, standing outside of my San Francisco apartment and talking to Garrett on the phone. I had reached out to him to see if he wanted to be on my podcast because I was a fan of what he was doing. The Portfolio Composer, his podcast, I had gotten really into it, gone down the rabbit hole with that, and just realized what an interesting person Garrett is and the lessons that he's learning through the Portfolio Composer that can be applied to musicians in any walk of life. So we are talking specifically today, well, we're talking about a few things, but I reached out to Garrett because I have fallen in love with Dorico, which is Steinberg's new music notation software. And we had Daniel Spreadbury of Dorico on the podcast maybe a month ago at this point, a couple months ago. And I discovered Dorico through Garrett's podcast. And it occurred to me that it could be interesting to me, certainly, and hopefully to folks listening, to see what the experience is like from people on two ends of the spectrum in terms of skills. I am a novice. I do not do much. I do like practically zero composing. I do some arranging. I make exercises for students. I've used music notation software my whole life here and again, and I've really fallen in love with Dorico. And Garrett has been using Dorico since it came out, and that's his piece of software of choice. So I thought it could be interesting to just talk to him about why do I like this software? Why is this connecting with me? How's it working for him as a composer? Dorico has been sponsoring his podcast and came on board as a sponsor for my podcast, but this is my idea, and just FYI, we're just chatting about this independently of, although I love Dorico. And I guess I'll give a quick shout out to them right here in the intro, along with our other sponsors, Ear Trumpet Labs, Practisma, and Modacity. Garrett is awesome. I really hope you enjoy this conversation. Let's dive in. The last time I saw you, I looked it up in my calendar. It was April 2019.
Is that when we met at that Mexican restaurant?
At that Mexican restaurant, which is maybe still my favorite meal I've had in the Mission. That was such a good time. That feels like 10 years ago at this point.
Isn't it? Oh my word. Yeah, crazy.
I know. Wow. How are things going on your end besides the obvious chaos of 2020?
Well, that seems to define every answer at this point, doesn't it?
Right. Yeah.
Things are good. Family is good. I'm not teaching at the university starting this last academic year, so really been just diving in all the way into this thing we do of building businesses, and it's been great, challenging, rewarding. It was nice to kind of fire my bosses, so to speak, and now I get to work for myself, and I'm not the best boss either, but it's better than working for somebody else.
Well, I remember you going through your schedule when we were hanging out last year, and just like the quantity of what you were doing, it made me feel very lazy, because I feel like I struggle to get 4 out the door. Every 2 weeks I get 4 podcasts out. I just batch them. I sit down and I have one horrible day, and just listening to everything that you were doing, at least at that point, it made me think like, come on, Jason, you can.
Well, yeah, I do a lot. I don't know how to answer that. I'm trying to get better at saying no to things and yes to more specific projects. So trying to knock out the big pieces and not getting caught up so much on all the little stuff, which is a real trick for me. That can be hard.
Oh, I know exactly what you mean. I was hoping, and I'm still hoping, that June 2021, I'd be able to hang out with you in Lincoln, Nebraska, because our bass convention is happening there. As I watch the news and am seeing that California is now saying 14-day quarantine if you leave the state is encouraged, maybe required soon. That possibility is looking ever dimmer. But we'll see. I retain hope. It would make so much sense because my mom lives in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. I could visit mom and drive down to the convention. Yeah. So, but we'll see. I have some Nebraska ties. My dad taught at the University of Nebraska, Omaha, and we almost moved to Omaha in 1988 or something like that. And I was just in Omaha actually just over a year ago at UNO doing a talk. So I was looking forward to getting to Lincoln. I think the only time I've ever been to Lincoln is driving through it on the way to Colorado or something like that.
That's true for 98% of the United States population. If they haven't flown over it, they've just blasted right through it on I-80.
Yeah, that's true of Sioux Falls, South Dakota, too, where I'm from. It's like, oh, yeah, I stopped off there one night on the way to the Black Hills or Montana or wherever. So.
Yeah. It's a good place to be. The people are nice. The pace of life is good. It's not insane, and I can get to anywhere I need to be in the city in under 30 minutes, usually like 15. So that's fantastic.
Well, I never expected to live in these major metro areas. I've sort of ended up living in the heart of the city in San Francisco and in Chicago too. But I'm from a relatively small town, and I've always enjoyed, and especially during a pandemic, I'm seeing the disadvantages of living like where I live. All the things that make you want to live in a place like San Francisco are out the window. I kind of wish I had a yard and a second stupid room. And so I kind of wish I could relocate for a couple of years, but I guess here we are, and I believe in it long term. But
yeah, the cities will grow back; they'll be fine.
Yeah. Man, well, so you are responsible in a good way for me, like going down a massive rabbit hole with Dorico.
Oh yeah,
which is you're. There are some music podcasters that I like. Every once in a while I'll listen. Like I subscribe to just about everything, but then I have a list of things that I really listen to, and you are on that list because I don't necessarily listen to every episode, but I listen to a lot because I just think you're an interesting person in the way that who you bring on. I feel like it helps me grow as a person listening to because you're our Venn diagram overlaps, but not as much as like if I was listening to another bass podcaster, though you are a bassist.
Not like you though.
But I was hearing this. I was like, what the heck is Dorico that Garrett's talking about? And it's one of those things, don't they say in marketing you have to say it 7 times before somebody picks it up? And, I'm always listening to podcasts, yours and others, like when I'm cooking or I'm on a run, so I'm not checking it out. But I finally looked it up, and I'm like, wait, what? Steinberg? Oh, and I use Cubasis on the iPad. Certainly I'm familiar with Cubase. Downloaded the trial. I went down the exact funnel I'm sure they were hoping. Download the trial. I'm like, good. Oh, this piece of software is amazing. And then I bought the full license, and I found myself, this is just me, late at night watching hours of Dorico tutorials and watching Daniel Spreadbury on various videos of podcasts, like talking about the feature set. And I just ended up messaging him and saying like, do you want to come on my podcast? And we had a great chat. But man, so thank you for introducing me to this, because it really has, like, genuinely it's made me enjoy arranging again and just playing around. It's made me take something that I was never doing, or if I did, it would be like, oh, gotta boot up Finale 2011 again, and and yeah. It's made me actually start to have fun with what little arranging I do.
Well, that's good to hear. Yeah, Dorico's just changed the way I've thought about music creation in a major way. But I'm really curious. How is it done that for you? What is it about the software that is giving you that response?
Well, I'm a, here I am on all these Apple products. I'm a big fan of user interface and just design, clean design, and it just seems to make a lot of sense to my creative brain the way it separates everything out. So I'm a long time Finale user. I think I started like 1991 Finale. My parents bought me the 3.5 discs, and then I always had academic licenses of Finale, and then I struck out on my own, and I had this stupid 2011 academic license from my last job that I was sort of battling. And it's one of those things where I would always have to remember what's the keyboard shortcut to do tuplets or to do this or that, or I dragged the staff and now it looks like crap. And half my time was on Google looking up how to do elementary things. And like Dorico, yes, I had to look it up, but I remembered it then. There's something about that shift, that pop over mode. It just worked. I could see instantly how it's more of a just kind of attractive experience, beautiful experience. It got out of the way, and maybe it's not totally fair to Finale because I was using an old version, but it's probably fair to Finale. I kind of despise that product. Sorry, Finale. I'll burn that bridge. Future sponsorship, no worries.
Well, I think that's one thing that the Dorico team really excelled at is once you start thinking in Dorico think. I know that's kind of weird. There's this learning curve, right? No matter what program you come from. But stuff makes sense. I remember learning Finale at the university, but I ended up becoming a Sibelius user in like 2001. I was still in undergrad. And that was version 2 of Sibelius is what I bought into. And I was with it all the way until Dorico came out. And I thought this is better than Finale because it makes sense. Layout's a little bit easier. And then Dorico just upped the game one more time. And part of that is I think they weren't trying to fix something that was in process. I mean, when Finale came out in the 80s and 90s, right, no one had done this before. It was amazing.
Right.
And Dorico was able to come in on the ground floor and rebuild the entire architecture and say, okay, if you're writing music and you want to do this, where should we put it so it makes sense? How are you going to think about it? Not buried inside a menu because it was, in version 8.7.6 that it got added in or whatever. And it's lovely. It makes sense. It's intuitive and it's fast.
Well, it's the giant challenge, and I loved it. Like I also thought, okay, it would be so fun to talk with Garrett. First of all, because I think you're awesome, and I'd love to have you on every week, But also just like someone who's a pro, and I'm just a hair above an amateur in terms of this sort of thing. I've done a lot of arranging for school groups. I make my own bass exercises, but I'm the guy who can't remember how to do triplets. When I boot it up, I go through phases where I do nothing, and then 3 months later I have to do a project. And I just did a giant project in Finale 2011. I did a couple of bass courses with this company over in the UK. And so I created like 100 examples in Finale, individual Finale files. And then I'm learning about flows in Dorico. And I'm thinking, so it's the cool thing about getting to start fresh is that you don't have to deal with that legacy, right? And last time I chatted with you, I believe you're a Creative Cloud user, Adobe Audition and the like. I don't know if you're still doing that, but at least
not so much. I mean, I use some Adobe products, but I'm not currently paying for a cloud subscription.
Okay, well, yeah. I am. Maybe I'm a fool for doing that, but you feel. I mean, they're trying to make it as usable as possible. You intensely feel that these are programs from the early '90s, right? That have.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. So just the ability to start from scratch like they did, that's got to be a really cool thing for Daniel and everybody on the team too, it's cool to know that they had that opportunity and then to like see how it is. It is so useful for my teaching. I've been doing these Zoom lessons like everybody, and I screen share Dorico. I put the piece that they're working on and then I do fingerings with them and that sort of thing on the fly. It's really cool.
Your students are responsive to it as well. Like they're watching you, they're not confused by the process. Instead, it's just aiding in your education, like communicating and.
Yes.
Everything. Yeah.
Yes. And that popover mode is so slick because it's like for fingerings, I just hit Shift F and we go through. I say, hey, let's try thumb 1-3 or whatever. And it's funny. I had a moment. I told Daniel this. I decided to really try to make one piece I was entering look like their edition, right? And as we were entering fingerings, it was getting more and more crowded. I finally said, I'm just going to let Dorico lay it out the way it wants to lay it out. And I was like, this looks way better.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. That's something I've been so happy with that when I'm producing a score for no matter what the project is, I find I don't have to do a whole lot of tweaking. The layout is organic and it scans well. Yeah, have you looked at, sometimes we'd produce something in Finale or Sibelius and it just looks stiff. The music doesn't have a life. But then I'd look at a really well-engraved piece of music, something from Boozy and Hawks or, a high-end music publisher, and there's something organic about the way the engraving looks. And Dorico gets there with their defaults. And so one of the things that I'm getting as a result of that is less sight reading errors from the players when I hand out parts.
People have been saying such great things about my course with Discover Double Bass Beginner's Classical Bass. Here is Nicholas Walker, professor of double bass at Ithaca College and past president of the International Society of Bassists. Nicholas writes, Jason draws from this vast network with his contagious enthusiasm and love of learning. Presented through the beautifully organized and easily accessible framework of Discover Double Bass, this is a terrific learning experience for any beginner, as well as a great model for any new teacher. I am blushing, Nicholas. Thank you so much. I'm just so thrilled with how this course came out. Jeff Chalmers and the whole team at Discover Double Bass are so professional. It was such a great experience, and it was the best representation of what I would love to take every single beginner through in terms of format and presentation, and I'm just so happy that it's out there. You can learn more. We've got a link in the show notes, or you can just visit discoverdouble.com/Jason Heath. This episode is brought to you by Dorico, and one of the things that struck me about Dorico when I first opened it up was this innovative user interface design. There are 5 different modes. There is setup, write, engrave, play, and print mode. And here is Senior Product Manager Daniel Spreadbury on why they set it up like this.
As they are presented to you on the screen, they're kind of there in a strip at the top left-hand corner of the screen, and they're very prominent. You can whack them with your mouse, or if you're using a Surface, you can tap them with your finger, and that basically then changes the whole UI of the program.
It is such an innovative design. It makes working for me so much cleaner in music notation software. I have become such a fan. I use this piece of software every single day. Check them out at Dorico.com. That'll take you to their page on Steinberg's website. And there's a free version, Dorico SE, that'll let you do practically everything the program does with up to 2 parts. So that's perfect if you're working with a student or making exercises or that kind of thing. Thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast, Dorico. That's interesting. That's interesting to hear. Okay, so you're finding that when you're actually okay. 'Cause that's why I wanted to talk to you about this, because I'm loving this with my bass exercises or my one person. But I like the experience of someone who's actually putting out, has more on the line with the music that they're creating. So the layout. So that's a huge testament that fewer sight reading errors. I mean, that's a giant. That's a giant thing.
It's a huge thing because rehearsal time's precious, right?
Yeah.
No matter what level you're working with. But the way the music looks on the page is less taxing on the eye for me. And I think a lot of players are finding that to be true too. Of course, you do have to go in and make sure page turns are as good as you can get them. There's never going to be a simple one-button solution for that. But it does a really good job of getting you almost there. And then it's just a few cuts, and your pages are great.
What was several things are quite different in this, and I was talking with Dan about some of these. The concept of flows is essentially movements within a piece, and that's not how Sibelius or Finale do things, right? Unless I'm missing a mode.
Not last time I was in those tools.
Okay.
Yeah. Flows in Dorico are a real game changer because from a compositional perspective, I can think about flows, like you said, as movements. And so, for instance, I just finished a big multi-movement work for concert band, and my engraver, Dennis Tabensky, actually, because I composed these over multiple years, he combined them into one Dorico file, and each movement is a separate flow. Okay, so what's really nice about that is that then when I create parts, I can create a master part that has all the movements, or I can just say, I only want this flow, or whatever. You can also think of flows as different score layouts. Now, Dorico has a better way to do that, but if you wanted just your full orchestration in one flow and you wanted a reduced orchestration in another, you could do that.
Yeah.
It's so great, and you can make sure that pagination and bar number continuity and everything lines up perfectly. I remember in Sibelius, I used to have to go in and I'd format a movement or a part, and then I'd go into the next movement, and I'd have to make sure all the pages and everything lined up right, and was it on the left side or right side, and then combine PDFs afterwards, and it was multi-stage.
Well, it's a real game changer just for these silly bass exercises I find myself creating all the time. I now have one Dorico file that's called bass exercises, and I just add a new flow, and I could drag them around. I can open it up again with my students like this, and then I can just send them the one, and it's just nice for my messy creative brain. Like, where did I put that? Thinking about that online course I put together with my Finale 2011 copy. I had some horrible Dropbox folder with hundreds of versions of of exercises. Then I had to send these files to the person who did the final layout and everything for that. But I just thought, wow, if I had discovered Dorico before that, just how much easier my life would have been. I was sitting in this coffee shop tinkering with all these Finale files. What did I call this one? What did I call that one? And it just the way to lay out a project. I can see how beautiful that would be for somebody who's writing multiple movements. And really, so much of what we write is multiple sections, right? It's very rare that you're writing just like one giant chunk of music, right?
Oh, yeah, well, yeah, it depends. But having that capability, some composers are using flows so that one flow could be like a draft or sketch flow, and then you can have a final product, and you can copy and paste between the two, and you don't have to have multiple files open like you're discovering.
Well, and then another thing that I thought, okay, this is weird, but then once I got it, I realized this is beautiful, is that you open up and there's that one rest, and there's no time signature or no nothing. And you think, like, what's wrong with this program? Why isn't it giving me 4/4 and G major? And then if you start to think about that a little more deeply, and even if you think about how, if you wanted somebody to just create, why are you putting those restrictions on them, right? And the way that Dorico understands, maybe you can describe this better than me, but it sort of treats each note value, it allows you to flow the note values around more easily. So if you were in 4/4 and then you say you wanted to be in 6/8, you could hit that and it would understand that change. Am I kind of, or can you give a better explanation than that?
Daniel Spreadbury has a very elegant solution, and when he says it in his British accent, it sounds magnificent. But my understanding is it treats time values as independent from the meter. So if I put in a quarter note value, then I can change the meter around that, and it will re-notate that appropriately no matter what the context is, which is so handy. Do you remember when you were in Finale and you write something and you had to go back and you had to add a rest somewhere and you just needed to shift everything?
Yes.
Like, it made you want to quit, or like it was sometimes easier to start that entire project over again. Mm-hmm. Not with Dorico. You can shift things in time. I can change the meter. I can cut measures in half. I can insert or take away time, and everything else stays whole. Like nothing breaks, like it would in Sibelius or Finale.
Well, it's like if I'm writing a blog post, I don't have to tell my blog post editor, okay, I want 8 paragraphs and I want to have 3 sentences per. No, it's like writing text, right? It's messy. You're doing something that, oh no, wait, I want to put this in here and I want to move this around and that, and it feels more like that. And also, just I'm thinking back to when I was classroom teaching and I wanted to do a composition project. How many times I told these poor kids, okay, you must pick this time signature first. It must be these bars long, and just the idea to just sort of mess around. It reminds me of actually Ableton Live. That's kind of my hobby, is making electronic music, and how I just start with nothing, and I don't know what I'm doing, and it's so easy to switch and move things around, and I sort of get that same sense of freedom. And so it's one of those things that seemed weird at first. I thought, where are my bars? Where are my 32 measures? And then, but it's an elegant enough program that you quickly learn how to add those things when you want them. But like you're saying, the ability to switch, and I'm imagining as someone who composes a lot, maybe you're not sure where that idea is going, right? You're not sure if it's going to ultimately be 6/8 or 5/8 or whatever. It just seems like it opens up so many possibilities.
And it's really handy when you're writing a unmetered passage. Like, let's say you're notating a cadenza of a sort, right? And we've all seen that on the sheet music where it's one entire system or multiple systems with no bar lines. And I remember having to figure out, okay, how many beats is it in this system? And then you You write that, and then you have to hide it. But in Dorico, you just say no meter, and it's not a problem. Everything you said and more. It's just the most mind-blowing way to think about writing music, because you're not tied into any decision early on. Every decision can be changed, or you can even begin writing without having to have solved those fundamental problems of meter or key or anything.
This episode is brought to you by the Practisma Practice Journal. And not only does this journal track your progress throughout 16 weeks, but it encourages you to find joy in your practicing. And here's Susanna Klein, author of Practisma, on the topic.
I don't think I was very good at finding joy in practice until I started working with others to try and create a little joy for them, and then kind of saying, well, why don't I do that too? And the empowerment thing, it's just, these are all kind of related. I mean, if you don't feel empowered, meaning if you don't feel like, not, hey, I'm great, but yes, I'm headed in the right direction. I'm making progress. In the future, things will be good, better.
I'm a big fan of this journal. I've gone through all 16 weeks myself on my own personal journey. It is so cool what Susanna's created. It's packed with research-based strategies to turn your ho-hum practice into extraordinary practice, and it really works. Learn more at practisma.com, where you can download the introductory chapter of the journal for free. And thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast. Every day when I sit down to practice, I get out my phone and I boot up Modacity, which is my practicing companion, and I have a specific routine I go through. And here is Modacity founder and CEO Mark Gelfo on what he does each day with Modacity.
What I do when I load Modacity every day is, if I don't have a playlist constructed already, what I do is I go in and I think, how long do I have to practice right now? Okay, I've got 40 minutes. Cool, I'm going to do 5 minutes on meditation, get my body state right. I'm going to do scales for 5 minutes, and I'm going to visualize, and I'm going to do this piece that I'm working on. You just set it up, see the budget, and follow the budget effortlessly by delegating that to the phone.
Letting my phone do all those logging details has been so great for my practicing. I can't recommend this app highly enough. Love it, love it, love it. Learn more at modacity.co, and we have a special offer if you go to our site for lifetime access to this app. It's so cool. Thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast, Modacity. I was talking with Daniel about this, and obviously this is probably obvious to anybody who's listening, but the buy-in that people have to a piece of software is so great. You get it took me 20, almost 30 years to get off of Finale, and not just because I was used to the pain. And I was talking, not for the podcast, but I was talking to somebody who composes for video games, and I was just asking, because this is right after I had bought Dorico, and he was just asking about some bass stuff, and then I said, "Hey, have you heard of Dorico?" And he said, "Yeah, I've been using it actually, and it's great. I was one of the beta testers or early users or whatever." And he said, "I'm using Sibelius because that's the industry standard still, and with Pro Tools and Avid and that kind of thing." But he said, "I feel like it's just about to flip the switch, and people are going to head and so." What's the word on the street in your circles, or you're in touch with many more composers than me? Are people, how's Dorico being received, I guess? And that's a kind of an open-ended question, but
I haven't encountered many people who don't like it.
Okay.
Once people commit to crossing that learning curve, they love it. They're in. Now, one of the biggest criticisms when Dorico first came out is that it couldn't do X or Y or Z, stuff that was really baked into Sibelius and Finale. But now that we're on version 3.5, almost everything you wanted to do, you can do. And so there's really no excuse to say, oh, well, I can't switch because only Finale can do whatever. That's almost entirely not true anymore, unless you're doing high-end graphic notation kind of stuff. So there's that. And what we're talking about is the cost of switching.
Yeah.
So there's this kind of sunk cost into, I've learned in this program, or I've bought every version for the last 20 years, right? So I put $2,500 into this software, whatever. And I just encourage people to try it. This isn't really a sales pitch, but you and I both absolutely love the software, and Dorico sponsors our shows.
Right, but this was my idea. Was like this is not a paid.
They're not doing. They didn't tell us to do this.
No.
They give you a fully functioning trial, It's not like, here, download it and you can experiment, but you can't print. Some software does that. No, this is for a full month. Everything, the whole kit and caboodle, no strings attached. Just try it. And if you have a registered copy of the other software, they give you cross-grade discounts. I mean, they're doing everything they can to make that switching cost easier. And you also asked, what's the word on the street? So every composer I've spoken with who's trying it loves the outcome for the reasons we've already discussed. The music looks good. It's easier to lay out with fewer problems. Input is very simple and clean, and they've copied both elements of Sibelius and Finale on that, so you can do note before time, or you can do time first. It just flows, however your creative process is. So I think, like that your friend said, the video game composer, we're about to see this become the biggest one. It's already on a par in terms of what can be produced with Finale and Sibelius, who are the main industry standards. And I think major publishing houses are moving to it because it's going to look great. It's easy. There's flexibility.
Well,
does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, it totally does. And I'll share something with you that I also shared with Daniel, but I think it's pretty cool. So my wife is a harpist, right, and harp pedal notation is notoriously difficult. And so I was telling her, hey, Dorico does harp pedal notation. And she was very skeptical. She's like, okay, let's see. She sat down and she started playing. She's like, oh, wow, that's right. And it puts it in red if you can't do it. And so having that, and Daniel is mentioning how they're planning getting more and more instruments to have that kind of intelligence with where the notes are. I know with guitar notation, it'll give you different options for where it can be done. And that makes composing for instruments you're not so familiar with a lot less scary, I guess would be my idea. So somebody who maybe would want to explore like a piece for, let's say, bass and classical guitar, but or harp or you name it, but they're worried that they're going to do something dumb and they don't have endless hours to consult with professionals. It just seems like experimentation becomes a lot less scary. That's just sort of my thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think so. We always run the risk of letting the computer do our heavy lifting in terms of not writing idiomatically because the computer plays it perfectly every time. Sure, of course. But those technical issues like harp pedaling, guitar fingering stuff where fret versus string, that helps facilitate if you're not familiar with the instrument. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think from a teaching perspective, Dorico is going to open the door, like you're seeing in your lessons, to helping students learn how to write music with more freedom. This last summer, a few other composers and I put together what's called the Music Creators Academy. Mm-hmm. And it was this online summer music camp where people could come and we created ensembles and the students wrote their own music. We gave a concert on at the end. And it was all in response to COVID shutting down live summer camps. And Dorico sponsored it, so every student got a fully functioning copy of Dorico.
Wow.
And so they were writing music in this too. And because it's intuitive, even like students don't have to go deep into it to make something that works musically. Mm-hmm. And they can share that with everyone else. It's so powerful. I can imagine people are going to create resources where classrooms and ensembles can assign certain parts of their homework or pedagogical outcomes to Dorico-styled exercises.
Yeah, it's the only piece of, and I have tried everything, in my amateur way. I've tried MuseScore, Note Flight, you name it, and I just, I always feel myself bumping up against the limitations or just battling the program somehow. I bought a new MacBook Pro, so I knew I had to get rid of my Finale 2011 because it wouldn't work anymore on the Catalina. Then I downloaded the free version of Sibelius where you can have 2 lines, and Dorico has a similar version, so people are listening who want to just do exercises like I'm talking about, or duets. You can do that till the cows come home with this free version. But it's the only program I've found where I'm remembering how to do everything when I open it up, and it's more fun and it's faster. I've been putting together these videos where I play through scales as one of my many pandemic projects, and I was doing the first batch of them on Finale 2011, and I was dreading them every week because I'd have to open it up and fingerings and stuff, and I did all 12 2-octave scales in the time it took me to do one
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah. Have you tried doing the multi-staff input at once yet?
Not yet. No.
Okay, so let's say you're arranging for a bass quintet or something. Okay? And it's a chorale style, so everyone has the same rhythm. You get into your right function, and you can select as many staves as you want, and then you just play into your keyboard, and it fills it out. So instead of having to think, okay, I'm going to write my top line and then my whatever, bass, alto, tenor, you just write it all at once.
Wow, that's awesome.
So if you have your voice leading figured out at your keyboard, you can just sit here and play it in, and then you flesh out all the lines simultaneously. It has made a big difference to the speed in which I can get ideas out. Now, obviously, I'm going to refine, and I don't want everyone playing the same rhythm all the time, but for the most part, homophonic music works like that.
What a great way to learn about just harmony in general. Like for a student, I'm just thinking educationally too. If you set something like that up and just get started, because like versus doing every single voice individually. Oh no, I'm doubling the fifth or whatever.
Yep.
Wow, you've given me a weekend project, Garrett. That's
it's so great. And then instrument switching in Dorico is way better than anything else. I don't know if you've experimented with that, but like. I don't know. Maybe you want to double on Piccolo.
I 100% have. I actually, I do a subscription to MuseScore only because they have all these, any sort of sports theme or whatever. Somebody's arranged it for like 2 saxophones or something. So with my students, I've even, and I will do this in less than 5 minutes in a lesson. They'll say, hey, I'm thinking about this piece. I'll say, oh, should we do a bass version of it? And I'll just go on MuseScore, download the Music XML or whatever, put it into Dorico, add a couple of basses, move it over, switch the octaves, change the key if it's something horrible because it was in saxophone land,
right,
and it's like 5 flats or something. And in at this point, seriously, less than 5 minutes, I have just texted them a PDF of their part and of both parts. So the multi-instrument thing, the empty-handed player concept and everything, that seemed to resonate with me. So anyway, that's my experience with that.
Oh, good. Yeah, sometimes that's a concept that's hard to wrap your head around, because you're thinking in terms of the player, not so much the staff line.
Right.
And Sibelius and Finale think in terms of what's on the staff. Mm-hmm. And Dorico rethinks that entirely. So for those people who are listening and you have no idea what we're talking about here, so when you create a score, you can choose you create a player or you create a section, and then you essentially assign an instrument to that player or section. And let's say typical doublings, maybe you're writing for a show and you've got your double bass, and then you need to switch to an electric bass at some point, right? So you actually assign both instruments to the same player. And then Dorico will automatically make sure that all of the clef changes, transpositions, if there are things, not between those two instruments, and notifications on the page are all done. It's seamless, it's perfect, and it works. I remember it was so tedious to create part changes, like if I had a flute doubling piccolo or saxophones doubling flute, whatever it was, and it was a pain in the neck. But Dorico makes that easy.
Yeah, so any sort of musical theater, scenario, I can only imagine the nightmare that is to put those sort of things together. The player playing multiple instruments makes a ton of sense once you wrap your head around it in any sort of practical situation. It's yeah, wow. Well, yeah. Go ahead.
Did you ever listen to the interview I did with Lily Harris on the Portfolio Composer?
No, but I'm writing that down. You're giving me some lunchtime listening.
And this is for your people, too, if you're interested in Dorico. So Lily is a professional music engraver. She's based in Britain, and she's on the Dorico team. And she's actually one of the primary writers of the user manual of Dorico. And Dorico has created all these incredible resources, the YouTube videos, and the manual is super helpful. And the manual is not just how do you do this in Dorico, but it's proper engraving and layout kind of teaching. And Lily is the one who wrote almost all of that. So a lot of our interview was about her, like, incorporating these things into it and why Dorico does music engraving better than anyone else, because it's following these principles that have been established over centuries, right? The reason it looks good, it's readable, it's scannable, and not taxing.
That's interesting because, I mean, that's one of those things. I've spent my whole life looking at this music, but I've never really given much thought as to the rules governing. Like, why does this look better than this? You know, why is this hard to read and not this? Okay, I every time I chat with you, Garrett, I leave with like a list of cool things to check out. So that's one of them, and I'll link up to that in the show notes, folks. I'm making notes. I say I will, and then I never do, but I will this time because I wrote it down.
I'll hold you to it.
How I can talk about Dorico till the cows come home, but since we're on the line, you are somebody that I probably put in the category of you are planning for the pandemic inadvertently with what you've been, the whole portfolio composer concept, and I'm sure this current situation hasn't made things any easier for you, but you are somebody I think of as really having an abundance mindset and looking for opportunities, and you've been profiling for 4 years, I think. And counting now, people thinking outside of the box, creating their own career. So this is, I guess I don't even have a question except like, what have you been exploring and how have things been shifting maybe for you in the pandemic, or people who are listening who they were freelancing wherever and now they have no work and they're sitting at home, hopefully not rocking in a tight ball, on the floor weeping after 9 months, but maybe just anything you want to dig into on that front, how things are for you, or what you've been seeing, or any advice. Sorry for the world's longest bad question, but
I'm so good at asking bad questions, Jason. I completely understand what you're asking.
Okay.
No, well, it's funny because I think you're right. Inadvertently, I have been preparing for this. So for those who don't know my story, I was on the academic track for most of my career, and I finished my master's and was doing adjunct teaching at one point 4 institutions and driving 100 to 150 miles a day to teach. And so I got to get the doctorate. I get a doctorate, I get a full-time job, and then I begin to see all of the myopia and seedy underbelly of how higher education politics works. I left my full-time teaching position, and I have been teaching adjunct until just this last year when, due to COVID restrictions, they reduced the budgets. And it was a way for me, actually, to rip off the Band-Aid and say, you know what? I'm going to go 100% into really helping people, because I feel like part of my natural talent stack is to be a teacher and a communicator and a mentor. So that's why I've been coaching people. That's why I started the podcast. And that's why I love communicating. And what I did over the summer is I built this summer, well, it was really a conference with a few other coaching colleagues called the Pivot Adventure Conference. And it was a weekend-long conference where we provided tools and training on how to make the changes in your life you need to make. And one of the biggest things that I've been realizing, and I've been trying to help other people see through this pandemic because it's so scary, is that there's still opportunities out there. And where those opportunities lie is the intersection between your talent stack, what makes you unique, and that's your skill set, that's your passion, that's your experience, that's your knowledge and your education, and then other people's needs and desires and problems. And where those two things intersect are an abundance of opportunities. And it's sometimes challenging for musicians to see this reality because we think, oh, well, I was performing live in a restaurant. Now I can't because everything's shut down in my city, or the orchestras aren't meeting, or whatever. But those problems that people had are still there. We just have to get a little bit more creative in solving them. So what kind of problems do people have, Jason? Well, they want entertainment. Maybe they want to grow in a skill. So can you teach them what you do? Maybe they want to get better at something. There's something that that you can help them with. What services can you provide? We can sell recordings and scores. People need music for all sorts of projects that are being created. Teachers still need music. Like the education system didn't stop buying music, right? It's changed. Private instructors like yourself need innovative and new resources. And if you're a great player or you're a teacher yourself, you create those. So that's what I'm trying to do right now, is I'm trying to give people hope and help them see that, the world isn't over yet. Right?
Right.
We still have an infinite number of ways that we can serve other people, and by putting other people's needs in front of our own, we're going to create opportunities that we can choose to monetize or not. A lot of nonprofits are really hurting right now because, well, people aren't giving us away as much money because incomes are reduced. So how can we find a way to partner with them that helps them raise money so they can, like maybe the local food kitchen needs, more food to give away. So could you put on a virtual concert where people donate money and you split sales with this? So you make some money, but then you're giving a whole bunch away to the nonprofit and you still get to do what you do, right? There's so many ways we can still help other people, make our communities richer, solve other people's problems, and make things work and use our musical abilities at the same time.
Well, that's something I appreciate so much about your podcast, because you give me so many, I find such inspiration in who you talk to, and it makes me realize how big the world is and how little I know. And I think a lot of us, the older I get and the more I do, the more I realize I know nothing. And there are so many opportunities I can't even begin. My problem is trying to figure out how to budget my time for all the opportunities there are. Now, I know that a lot of people, if you've been spending your whole career drilling down to get into something like the San Francisco Symphony, which is not playing concerts at the moment, or any orchestra, or maybe on that academic track, and then you were doing adjunct, and then everything got blown up, in 2020. I realized that you might not have been thinking about these things that Garrett's talking about, but a great place to start, I would say, is just your podcast, man. It is a wealth of resources, and it just makes it's such a great it's a great look. Pick your episode at people who have, because you vet your guests carefully, I know. And so the people that you profile have really done interesting things in the music world. And again, the portfolio career composer, the whole portfolio career concept, that's you. I've recommended so many people listening to your podcast just as an idea, whether or not they're a composer. I think composers have had challenges that are, slightly different, of course, than performers. But I think solving, it's kind of like when classical players ask what to do in terms of, thinking outside of the box. I say, look at jazz players. Jazz players have never been expecting the gig. There's no like magic salaried gig, that most of them kind of know that. So if you look at how they've built their careers and had to do more guerrilla marketing and had to find opportunities, they're a good place to look. I would say composers and the people you've profiled in particular are a really interesting place to start.
Oh, well, thanks, Jason. I do think it's really important. And one of the first questions I ask almost everyone who's on my show is, what's in your portfolio? Meaning, what are all the things you're doing to generate income? And the listeners of your podcast and the readers of your blog, they know this too, that very few of us make all our money doing one thing.
Right.
It's not the reality of a creative career at all. So some of us teach, some of us record, some of us perform, some of us do 5 or 6 other things, and that's the portfolio. And I think it's important to see that other people are making it work, that they are successful, and you can be too. And if anyone can listen to any of my episodes and say, oh, there's an idea, I'll try that, then I think it's a success from my perspective.
Oh, yeah. Well, and if I look at my portfolio, I imagine you or anybody listening, that it has shifted over the years. I'm doing a different set of activities. My suite of activities, I like to say, it's quite different than the first time we connected for the podcast. And I'm sure it'll be different in 2 years. I mean, it's certainly different with the pandemic than it was a year ago when I was traveling all over the place. But even during the pandemic, it's shifted. And I go, Seth Godin, who I obviously Garrett is quite familiar. If you're not familiar with him, just type Seth into Google. He's the first search result. I'm mostly done with his most recent book, The Practice, which is just, he's such a great person to listen to in terms of big picture thinking and working like a professional, which is something he focuses on. And the difference between an amateur and a professional for Seth, paraphrasing here, is you show up even when you don't want to as a professional. You sit down and do the work, and part of the work is finding these opportunities that Garrett is describing. I was talking to the president of a company I work for, Eastman Strings, and I was just talking about reaching out to somebody, and it sort of became an advice session for Jason and life in general. He's like, look, there's nothing to be lost by reaching out to somebody, because the worst is that they won't respond or they'll say no, but that almost never happens. It's only, if anything, net positive. So, just reaching out to that nonprofit, like Garrett was saying, reaching out to it's that cultivating that mindset of being extroverted, sitting down, carving out 30 minutes, an hour, whatever, just to check out what's new, reach out to somebody that you have, it's like a muscle that you develop. And I know you've got that, Garrett. I have developed that over time. And just working like a professional on developing those portfolios, I think, is just so critical.
Well, it's not easy. It's work.
Right. It is work. Yes.
This is the work of what we're doing.
Yeah.
And we want it to be easy, but the world doesn't owe us anything. It doesn't owe us a gig. It doesn't owe us a performing position, but we can create those opportunities. Mm-hmm. We can find them. Yeah.
Yep. Man, I love to, you're somebody I would have, I always want to be respectful of your time, because I know you've got a bunch of things on the platter, but I would have you on every week if I could. It's so much fun to listen to you. It's so fun to listen to you when you connect with somebody else that I know. I think maybe a year ago or something, you had Scott Lang on the podcast, who's a friend and colleague of mine. And it was just, I was on a run. I remember listening to your podcast, and I just remember how small the world felt listening to you and Scott talk about, and then you started talking about this company that I was working with Scott, where they got busted by the FBI, which is my favorite story that I don't share publicly. I've many times thought about writing a blog post titled "The FBI Seized My Bass Course. Here's Why."
Well, you did put that in an email recently.
Oh yeah, I decided I just don't want to put that out in anything that's too searchable, because I just don't want to. The music world is very small. The music education world is very small, and I think everybody's just kind of embarrassed by that whole thing. So I don't want to be a jerk, but I can't resist, Garrett. I have to share it a little. So I decided I'll talk about it on my email list. I'll talk about it on the podcast. But I just don't. I have the YouTube video in my mind that I could create that I think would be pretty entertaining. But I've resisted the urge so far.
Oh, you totally should do it. Not to be salacious, but there's lessons to be learned here, right?
Yes.
Even within music education, there's Bernie Madoff style schemes happening.
Yes.
Which is essentially what happened, right?
Yes. And if people are listening thinking, what the heck are we talking about? The super short, the 2-sentence version is, I was working with a company called Musicians Toolkit. Turns out that they may or may not have been a money laundering operation for this big Ponzi scheme in Salt Lake City, Utah, that defrauded investors of $200 million plus. Now, so I made the very short version. I was their orchestra content director, liaison, whatever the title was. I filmed a bass course, which never saw the light of day because the FBI seized all their assets and they've never surfaced. But you know what? That was a positive for me, that experience, because why? I got experience making a bass course.
Yeah.
I mean, who gets that experience? And I planned and I did all this. And I remember thinking, I don't even care if this comes out because it was worth it to do this. It turns out it never came out. Now, fast forward, and I ended up partnering up with this other Discover Double Bass, which is the company I would want to make a bass course with anyway. But I had even told the guy, Jeff Chalmers, too bad, I just shot a bass course. So I had the opportunity in 2020, actually, right before the pandemic hit, to go over and film another bass course, 2 bass courses actually, and I had that rehearsal, back in 2018. So to me, it was nothing but net. It was a great experience, and I even said to Jeff, I hope I'm not cursed and that the FBI doesn't somehow invade the UK and seize your assets, because that's the trend. That did not happen so far. So it's one of those things, like whether something blows up or not. I've always got 5 or 6 projects in the hopper that I'm working on. One of them's going to go nowhere. One of them's going to take off way better than I thought, and a lot of them are just going to sort of simmer there and not maybe do a little. That's just sort of how my life has been.
Well, that's part of the creative life too, right? Not every project we're going to do is going to be a winner.
Right.
But if we don't keep putting stuff out, as Seth says, ship your art, right?
Yes.
Some of the art's going to fly, some's going to fall, but you got to just keep putting it out there.
That's right. Here, I made this. That's another one of Seth's lines, and that's something I think about all the time. And that's just the practice. It's the practice.
It really is being the discipline and showing up every day, whether you feel like it or not. Right. Yeah. I just did a clinic with a school in Texas, a university, because they're playing a piece. So I zoomed in, and the students had some of the best questions. And one of them was about writer's block. And I basically gave a Seth Godin-like answer. It's like, listen, there's no such thing as writer's block. It's about letting yourself be a discipline to the process, right? Yeah. And there are days when I don't write much. There's days when I do more erasing than writing. But because I show up, then the creativity is there, and it's an exercise. It's a muscle that gets developed. I'm not waiting for the muse. I'm not trying to capture something. Right. Yeah, because you can't control that. What you can control is sitting in this chair or sitting in your chair and putting in the time. And what I think will fly almost never flies, and what I think was mediocre is the thing that blows up. And I'm finding that as I put out, certainly with the podcast. I mean, I try not to look at my stats too much because you can just go down a time suck with that. But every once in a while when I go into the podcast, I think, that one blew up, right. And then somebody that I thought would, and YouTube's an even more, rapid barometer in terms of that. I'll put out a video and it gets 25,000 views, and I thought it was stupid. And I put out one that I pour my heart and soul into, and it gets a couple hundred views. Yeah. And you just have to be detached from the process and just ship. And through the practice, you'll create what you can create, and you'll get better. But it's just that I kind of give a similar riff to high schools when I come in or that sort of thing, and they ask about what should I do. I just say start doing something. Start putting out put out an Instagram video once a week. Write something once a week. Shoot a photo once a week. Just get into the practice of creating something and bringing it into the world. Get it out there.
Mozart,
how many Kerschel numbers are there? 550 something?
Right.
I don't know, a lot. But how many of those actually get played? 10%, 20%?
Yeah.
And one of the best lessons I ever had as a creator is in middle school. I was taking a photography class, and the teacher saw that a handful of us were really, really into it. So she offered a one semester. There were 6 of us. We basically got as much darkroom time as we want and just incredible photography lessons. But the biggest takeaway I took out of that whole thing, and this is like, oh my gosh, almost 30 years ago now. But she said, you'll shoot a whole roll, right? And you can have a 36 exposure roll. 10% of those are going to be worth printing. Mm-hmm. But you still have to shoot the whole roll. And that's part of shipping your art. It's like, okay, not everything's going to be great, but there's going to be some gems in there. But if you don't get through all the crap, you're not going to find the gems either.
Yeah, and then you fast forward 5 years and you look at back, and then you look at now and you're like, oh, I've gotten better. Wow, like with the podcast, 13 stinking years I've been doing this podcast, and I still ask bad questions and say and ah, but I do a lot less of that than I did 13 years ago. I'll tell you that. So
Amen.
And it's one of those things I don't even think about. I mean, I have this preposterous podcasting schedule. I put out 2 a week, and I've been doing that for years. I would never recommend anybody do that, but it's just like the groove I've fallen into, and I don't even think about it. It's just part of my life, it's something that I don't. And this is 100% true. I really don't care how well it does because it makes me better. Like, I would want to chat with you anyway, even if if this is fun. I'm gonna go eat lunch. And I'm gonna feel pumped up, and I'm going to be thinking about what we talked about. And so I am getting something out of this. I feel like I'm growing as a person doing this. And it just so happens that people follow along. That's great. But if nobody followed along, it's still great, because if that makes sense, I think that's something that if you can think about that with projects you do, like that bass course, the FBI seized it. That's okay. I got better.
Yes.
It's an extreme example, but I think that's a good lesson if you're thinking about your craft. Just regardless of outcome, think about how you will grow through that.
Yeah, I love it. It's great. Yeah, I agree.
I want to be respectful of your time, but any day, my friend, anything you want to talk about, anything you got coming out, the door is always open, and it's just fun to hang out. I hope. I fear it won't happen, especially look at the news, but I hope we will be convening in Lincoln, Nebraska. And if so, even if it's like meeting in a park, it'd be great to hang out again. I can't believe that it was like a year and a half ago or so that I saw you. It feels like it was five minutes ago, but I just becoming friends with you has just been so great. I remember meeting up with you, seeing you at the Midwest Clinic maybe 3-4 years ago with, and then with the Composer Collective. And I love seeing the journey you're on, and it's fun. I can't believe I think it was 2016 that we first talked for the podcast.
I think that's right. Cause I started my show in 2015. But you've been a constant source of encouragement, Jason. You do such inspiring work, and the way that you put yourself into your art here and serving your community is truly an inspiration for me and the other music podcasters, because we talk about you, you know.
Oh no.
So we'll be like, oh yeah, well, I just had a conversation with Jason, and now I have the energy and the fortitude to keep going. He's inspired me to keep the fire lit, and you're doing such good work, and you really are making a difference for the people you're serving, the bass world. Clearly. And so kudos to you, man. You're an inspiration, you're a true friend, and you're doing good stuff.
Well, I appreciate it. Same to you. You're such a genuine person. There's no artifice with you. And I know that from hanging out with you. You're just such a genuine person. I remember reaching out to you. I reached out to you, I believe, and because I discovered you played bass or something. This is in 2016, and then you gave me a call on the phone, and we just started talking about doing a show and the possibility of doing a show. I thought that was really cool. It's just a very human way to connect about something like this versus trading emails and that sort of thing. And that's the only time that's ever happened for a podcast. And I'm coming up on 800 now. And I just think that's what should happen. So it's just you're again, I'll say it for the third time, you're such a genuine person. And so I just I appreciate spending time with you. It's great, man.
Oh, likewise, Jason. And for the people who are listening, if you want to sign up for my Portfolio Composer newsletter at theportfoliocomposer.com, every Friday I've been putting out what I call the Friday Five. It's just like 5 things to think about as you move into the weekend to help you grow your business. Action steps, business lessons, stuff I'm not putting on the blog or in the podcasts. So hopefully you guys will get some value out of it. So theportfoliocomposer.com.
Garrett, you rock. Daniel Spreadbury and everybody behind Dorico, you all rock too. And you heard Garrett and I obviously talk about things besides Dorico at the end there. And it's just really interesting what he's doing for the music community. By the way, something that I should have mentioned in the intro, sorry, Garrett and everybody involved, but the Ultimate Music Business Summit is coming up. And we have shared out about that in our newsletter. But let me and again, I'm not going to edit this outro. Jason, you're not allowed to edit the outro. Let me just make sure I have the link correct here. I think it's Ultimate Music Business Summit. Okay, anyway, sorry. Look at the show notes. Jason, you should prepare better. And check this out. I am doing a session on how to level up your video game. They're not video games as in playing video games, how to level up your skills making video. That's not the title, video games, because Garrett and I were talking about the confusion there. But there are 23 people total, I think, doing sessions. It's free for a limited time to sign up. Check it out. It's another example of Garrett thinking big, trying new things, collaborating with people. Those are just things that I admire so much in him. And you heard me say this throughout the episode, but he's just all good people. Great. Just the integrity of Garrett is incredible in my interactions with him over the years. And I've hung out with him at conferences a bit. We had lunch together, as you heard at the beginning, here in San Francisco when he was visiting. He's just such a genuine person. I thought as I was doing the intro for this, and this is the third of 4, and my stomach's rumbling, so I will need to hop off here and make some lunch in a second. But I'm just off the top of my head. That's what I'm trying to do here in these outros. And The topic of sponsorship is a tricky one, and I could talk for an hour about this, so I'm looking at the clock and making sure I don't do that. But it's a funny line to walk, especially when you're creating content. And the things that I have thought about for over the years, and by the way, I've had such hilarious experiences. Dorico, who is not currently a sponsor, but I imagine will be in the future, and we've done a lot of content together. Wow, there's a ambulance going, or fire truck going by. You can probably hear that. But we did some How Strings Are Made sponsored episodes, which I made clear. And I remember getting some, "You are a sellout, Jason. I'm never listening again," and comments. And then I got a comment like that from the exact same person on something else I did, which makes me realize they are listening. So they were just, I guess, threatening not to listen. But it's a funny line to walk. And I know that anybody who does any sort of new media, do people still use that term, work like that and works with sponsors, they walk that line. I try to make it clear what is and is not sponsored, but I also try to find ways to profile things that I think are interesting. I have never worked with a sponsor that I don't think their product is interesting. And in all cases where it's practical, I use their gear. I have certainly checked out their gear at the absolute minimum if it's something that I do. Like Rob Ancelotti with bass capos, it was a sponsor like 4 years ago. I'm not going to get new capos on my bass. That would be bizarre because I have beautiful capos on my bass, but I've checked them out over the years, quite familiar. So there's an example. Dorico, I'm eating my own dog food with all of these sponsors right now, and that's what I generally try to do. But I'm also really open-minded to trying new things, and so are the sponsors that I've worked with. Dorico certainly has been great with this new relationship. Dorico has been epic over the years, and I like working with companies. I have resisted, one more thing on the topic of sponsorship. Over the year, better way to put it, I have flirted with the idea of Patreon type support the show, asking for donations, whatever it looks like. I've been thinking about this since before Patreon was either a thing or certainly before it was big. And I've just resisted for a few reasons. I think that's a good model. I believe in that model. Here are reasons why I've resisted. FYI, if you're listening this far. One, I've never seen anybody in my immediate kind of peer group, let's say people who have followings around what I do, that has really been crushing it on Patreon. I look at their Patreons and it's like, okay, but financially, it makes more sense to do an ad deal with a company. And my niche is so clear in terms of bases. There are so many people that it's just it's an attractive market for a lot of companies. So it seems to make more sense to do that. And I've resisted asking for money in a million different ways, and people who do pay, and I'm not ripping on anybody who does Patreon. It's great. Go for it. And I may very well have gone that way when I started this podcast. I feel weird both taking sponsorships and asking for money from the people that are listening. And the people that do Patreon, again, not ripping on anybody who does Patreon, they tend to talk about the Patreon a lot in their episodes. And I'm looking, it's like 4 minutes in, and they're still not into the content. And I don't know, it just doesn't seem to make sense to me. I was even having a conversation with Jennifer Rosenfeld, who's been on the podcast before. She's a business coach, has worked with a lot of people, actually worked with a lot of people you've heard on the podcast here. She and I were having lunch back in the old days before we were all wearing masks at Fog City Diner. I can practically see it from my window. And I was having this exact conversation with Jennifer. I was saying, I just can't get my head around the sponsorship thing. And she strongly advocated for me doing that. And I don't know. It just doesn't feel right. And if things don't feel right to me, I just try not to do them. One thing that we are doing that I can totally get behind, that's an extremely long way of saying I am totally fine with exchanging a product. And so this sheet music store that we've launched, that is the exact sort of thing I'm into. I don't like, it's not begging. I know it's not begging, but I just don't like asking for donations. I don't know. And maybe Jason 5 years from now will listen back to this late at night some night and think what a fool he was. But it just doesn't sit with me. Maybe it's my Polish Catholic upbringing or my Midwestern roots, or some psychological problem I have. I don't know. It just doesn't feel right, and it hasn't been necessary. I don't feel like it's slowed me down in terms of my creativity. I don't feel like it's something that and again, this is all subject to change, but that's just my thinking behind how I deal with sponsorships in general. I like the idea of being all in on one. So all in on sponsorships and working with companies. And I like working with companies. I work for Eastman Strings. Note, they are not a sponsor, although they could be at some point, but I felt like that relationship makes more sense to just let the podcast be the podcast, let my job with Eastman be the job with Eastman. And through that, I work with a lot of brands. I work with a lot of companies. I'm in that world. It makes a lot of sense to me, and it seems to be a real win-win. That's not to say that thing, again, I'm repeating myself, Jason, okay? That means I got to exit. But that's just my thinking on that. I don't know if that's helpful at all, but since we were talking about Dorico, who's a current sponsor, I thought maybe that might be of use to somebody. Let me get out of here and thank the team. They are Michael Cooper, Steve Hinchy, Mitch Mooring, Trevor Jones, and Krista Copper. That theme music is Eric Hochberg and myself jamming back in the mid-2000s. Check out erichochberg.com. I got to look up that URL, Jason. And we're going to be talking more about our new intern that's coming on board. I'm really excited for that in 2021. I'm your host, Jason Heath, and we'll see you again soon for more life on the low end of the spectrum.